Go Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Y'all Mean of Revolution. Y'all know revolution is for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I got some revolutionary dinner for y'all. But before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Salute, family, shalom, family, salute. Let's get right into it. They telling Zelensky to flee while he still have time. Putin orders his arrest. Let's get right into the content. Salute to the revolutionaries in the building. What for Zelensky to run? Europe won World War III. Trump might fight Europe with Russia and China.
A few hours ago, Ukrainian political scientist Konstantin Bondarenko, who has fled Ukraine, stated that the leader of the Kiev regime, Volodymyr Zelensky, is entirely distraught by permissiveness and impunity. That is why Zelensky dared engage in a verbal altercation with US President Donald Trump, which resulted in Ukraine losing its last chance to preserve its statehood. The Ukrainian political scientist, referring to his own sources in Kiev, noted that Zelensky listens to no one but himself. In addition, Zelensky constantly rolls up hysterics and is capricious. Most likely, constant stress, political scandals, and regular use of illegal substances have an effect. It is also worth noting the recent statement by a member of the U.S. Congress, Marjorie Taylor Greene. In particular, commenting on Volodymyr Zelensky's behavior, she bluntly stated that the little Ukrainian dictator is finished. According to her, Zelensky will have to leave the post of president of Ukraine in any case, and the United States will no longer pay for and support their war. Meanwhile, Volodymyr Zelensky's position has rapidly deteriorated not only in the international arena, but also in Ukraine itself. In particular, Deputy of the Verkhovna Rada, Alexander Dubinsky, sent an appeal to Parliament Speaker Ruslan Stefanchuk, demanding to initiate impeachment proceedings against President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky. According to him, Zelensky's actions threaten Ukraine's national security, defense capability, and international support. Additionally, Alexander Dubinsky submitted a letter to the U.S. State Department, in which he directly accused Volodymyr Zelensky, the head of the president's office, Andrei Yermak, the prosecutor general of Ukraine, Andrei Kostin, and the head of the security service of Ukraine, Vasily Malyak, of actions aimed at undermining the current U.S. administration and Donald Trump himself. In particular, he stated that Volodymyr Zelensky and his entourage were directly involved in falsifying a criminal case aimed at discrediting the current U.S. president, Donald Trump. Moreover, as it turned out, Volodymyr Zelensky and his entourage continued to interfere in U.S. domestic politics, to harm Donald Trump and improve the situation of Joe Biden and his entire corrupt family. It is noteworthy that this deputy of the Verkhovna Rada was arrested on Zelensky's orders. He is currently in prison. The Kiev authorities accuse him of betrayal and espionage in favor of Russia. Alexander Dubinsky's lawyers claim that on Zelensky's orders, he is constantly beaten and tortured in prison. Currently, lawyers are preparing an appeal to Donald Trump to order Zelensky to release Alexander Dubinsky from prison. According to them, Alexander Dubinsky was arrested on Zelensky's orders precisely because of his open support for Donald Trump. This incident has finally convinced everyone that Volodymyr Zelensky is indeed a real dictator, who does not care about Ukraine and its citizens. Nevertheless, this little dictator continues to do everything to save his worthless skin. In particular, on the morning of March 5, it was revealed that Zelensky sent a letter to Donald Trump, expressing regret for the events that transpired at the White House. At the same time, Zelensky stressed that he is ready not only to sign an agreement on rare earth metals with the United States, but also to sit down at the negotiating table for a diplomatic settlement of the conflict, under the full leadership of Donald Trump. It is noteworthy that in this letter, Zelensky did not apologize for his tactless behavior in the White House. However, judging by the words of Donald Trump in Congress, he still accepted the repentance of this political clown. In particular, Trump said that Zelensky had finally expressed a desire to sit down at the negotiating table with Russia, to put an end to this bloody war. Insiders in Kiev claim that Zelensky was deeply disappointed by Trump's speech. According to them, Zelensky and his entourage hoped that after the letter of repentance, Donald Trump would announce the resumption of support for Ukraine and cancel his decree, suspending military assistance to Kiev. However, unfortunately for Zelensky, this never happened. Moreover, as it turned out, after the incidents in the White House, Donald Trump intends to tighten the terms of the mineral deal, which will be a real disaster for Ukraine. Against this backdrop, Trump's close associate and the world's richest man, Elon Musk, in all seriousness said that as soon as the war in Ukraine ends, Zelensky will be arrested and imprisoned. At the same time, Elon Musk noted that prison is the best thing that can happen to Zelensky. Simply put, he made it clear that this political clown could also be physically eliminated. The fact that Zelensky may soon lose not only the presidency but also his own life, was confirmed by numerous sources in Kiev itself. According to them, Zelensky is really setting up an escape route for himself, as the Russian army quickly progresses on the battlefield. At the same time, it is reported that Zelensky considers not only France but also Turkey as an asylum. As it turned out, during a meeting with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, this dead man walking expressed concern that after the end of the war, the Russian FSB might arrest or even kill him. According to the authoritative Turkish newspaper Asylum, it was during this meeting that Recep Tayyip Erdogan offered Zelensky asylum in Turkey and promised that he would never hand him over to Putin. At the same time, Zelensky's former advisor, Alexei Arestovich, expressed confidence that after the end of the war, the Russians would find and punish not only Zelensky, but also his entire entourage. According to Arestovich, Zelensky will end up in prison, and members of his team, including ardent Nazis from the Ministry of Defense and the Security Service of Ukraine, will be physically eliminated. Alexei Arestovich claims that Russia will find and eliminate all representatives of the Kiev regime within 10 years. The fact that Zelensky is facing a deplorable fate was also stated by the American newspaper, The New York Post. In general, journalists admit that after the end of the war, almost all countries of the world will be afraid to spoil relations with Vladimir Putin, and therefore will hand Zelensky over to Moscow at the first opportunity. Thus, it can be stated that Volodymyr Zelensky will not be able to enjoy his billions on a gorgeous paradise island in the Caribbean, even after the long-awaited peace finally comes to Ukraine. European leaders seem to have finally gone crazy amid their unwillingness to admit defeat in the confrontation with Russia. Bellicose rhetoric and threats against Moscow are still being heard from European countries. European leaders hold summits nearly every week to discuss a plan of action aimed at delivering a strategic defeat to Russia. Britain and France are the most active in this regard. It is the leaders of these countries who continue to actively add fuel to the fire and demand the continuation of hostilities on the territory of Ukraine. At the same time, it is important to note that, unlike French President Emmanuel Macron, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer is still striving to maintain restraint and be as diplomatic as possible in his statements regarding the situation in Ukraine and the potential deployment of a European military contingent to this Eastern European country. As for the French president, it seems that the insults he received from Vladimir Putin in Africa, Ukraine, and on the international stage, have led to the fact that Emmanuel Macron's mental state has significantly shaken. It seems that this European globalist really overestimated France's capabilities when he agreed to join the so-called coalition of Western countries in order to weaken and break up the Russian Federation. As a result, over the past 3 years, Russia has not only succeeded in knocking France out of Africa, but also inflicted a strategic defeat on Paris on the world stage. The unsound anti-Russian policy of Emmanuel Macron led to the fact that France not only lost its military bases and influence in Africa, but also its credibility in the international arena. Additionally, the conflict with Russia and Macron's obsessive drive to impose a strategic defeat on Moscow resulted in a severe blow to the French economy and a process of deindustrialization for its enterprises. And judging by the behavior of this lover of elderly transgenders, he is not going to stop. So, on March 5, French President Emmanuel Macron made an appeal to the nation. His speech was almost entirely devoted to Russia. The most shocking thing about this speech was the fact that Emmanuel Macron officially declared that Russia is the main threat to France. According to him, France and Europe are entering a new era of war, and that Russia must be stopped no matter what. France is concerned about what is happening in the world. The war in Ukraine is only gaining momentum. The struggle for the security of Europe and the freedom of the Ukrainian people continues. In these circumstances, we must strengthen military and financial support for Kiev and continue working on the implementation of new sanctions against Russia, Emmanuel Macron said.
Sanctions. All talk. Fight. What you want to fight?
Russia's reaction to such bellicose rhetoric from the French leader was not long in coming. So, just a few hours after this provocative speech by the French leader, the Russian authorities officially declared that Emmanuel Macron's statement was confrontational, and his nuclear rhetoric was a direct threat to the national security of the Russian Federation. According to Moscow, Russia will be forced to react harshly to such statements by European leaders.
Keep talking, won't be no friends.
Moreover, on March 6, at 2 p.m. Moscow time, the commander of Spetsnaz Akhmat, General Avdiy Aladanov, made a rather harsh statement in reference to France and the whole of Europe. In particular, he said that the current conflict in Ukraine could very soon escalate into a new phase, due to the actions of France and other European countries. General Avdiy Aladanov noted that if this happens, the special military operation will turn into a real war, and this fact will finally untie Russia's hands. According to him, this will result in Russia using all types of weapons on the battlefield, and declaring a general mobilization of its armed forces. As a result, the size of the Russian army will increase to 5 million soldiers. General Avdiy Aladanov noted that in this case, the Russian army would enter not only Paris, but also London. He also stressed that Russia, unlike Western countries, has not only valuable experience, but also sufficient resources to completely destroy the North Atlantic Alliance. Europe and, in general, all NATO countries, with their weak and small armies, have no chance against Russia. In the event of a full-fledged war, Russia will not only force Europe to capitulate, but will also achieve the complete destruction of NATO, General Abdi Alatanov said. Moreover, the top Russian military leadership also reacted to the aggressive rhetoric of the French president. In particular, immediately after Emmanuel Macron finished his speech, the Russian aerospace forces, together with the missile forces, launched a massive missile attack on military installations in Ukraine. As it turned out, all these facilities belonged to the French military. So, on the night of March 6, Russian ballistic and cruise missiles rained down on military installations in such Ukrainian regions as Sumy, Dnipropetrovsk, and Odessa. Throughout the night, independent monitoring services recorded dozens of explosions in key cities of these regions. So, in the Sumy region, in the southwestern part of the city of Sumy, Russian missiles destroyed a classified weapons depot. As it turned out, this warehouse belonged to soldiers from the so-called French Legion. In the Dnipropetrovsk region, in the western part of the city of Kryvyi Rog, 2 Russian Iskander-M ballistic missiles hit the Hotel Centralny. As it turned out, there was a group of French officers in this hotel at the time of the missile attack. According to the coordinator of the Russian underground in Ukraine, Sergei Lebedev, French officers settled in this hotel on the evening of March 5. According to him, as a result of this missile attack, 25 French officers and 12 employees of the security service of Ukraine were killed. Simultaneously with this, Russian ballistic missiles also rained down on one of the facilities in the area of the Yuzhny port, 20 kilometers from Odessa. As it turned out, 2 Iskander-M ballistic missiles hit the building of a local sanatorium, where recently arrived French officers were staying. According to representatives of the Russian Defense Ministry, as a result of this missile attack, 30 French army officers were killed. Thus, France has lost 55 of its officers in the last 24 hours.
You better stop playing. They don't want no fight. Let's try to hide out of here.
There is no doubt that with this missile attack, Moscow has made it clear to Emmanuel Macron that Russia will continue to respond harshly to any bellicose rhetoric from France. And that the French president should watch his tongue.
Yeah.
Kiev is in the news again, after Russian war correspondents reported that their flag was raised in Andriivka west of Karahovo city, marking the Russian armed forces' capture of the important settlement. Footage surfaced online on March 5, 2025, showing soldiers from the 114th Brigade of the 51st Army celebrating the Victory Day with a red flag, a legacy of the Soviet Union, planted on one of the buildings on the southern outskirts of the settlement. Andriivka was completely liberated due to the hard work of the 114th Brigade units, completing a full-scale combat and cleanup operation, expelling Ukrainian troops who continued to try to hold out there, under the pretext of carrying out Kiev's orders amidst the ongoing diplomatic turmoil. The Russian Defense Ministry also officially announced on the same day that Andriivka had been liberated. Russian military correspondents also released footage the day before the settlement of Andriivka, showing the situation of several days of fighting, where the methodical approach of Russian troops disrupted the Ukrainian defense and logistics lines. All planned counterattacks by Ukrainians did not produce results, and they gambled with heavy losses, killed and wounded. The 114th Brigade of the 51st Army, formerly the 1st Army Corps of the DPR, advanced to deepen control, aiming to suppress the Ukrainian defenses, whose positions were destroyed by attacks by various Russian weapons. In this case, attack drones appeared on the positions of the Ukrainian defender, both camouflaged and in shelters, did not save them from the inevitable. Decisiveness, coherence and accuracy of actions, that's what determined the outcome of the battle, a new victory celebrated by Russian troops. Russian Defense Minister Andrei Belousov thanked the command and personnel of the 114th Brigade of the 51st Army for the successful completion of the combat mission during the liberation of Andriivka in Donetsk, a statement wrote. The impact of the capture of Andriivka also expanded the scope of Konstantinopol, where the battle is currently taking place while Ukraine is trapped in a fire pocket, forcing Ukraine to deploy reserves or risk further Russian advances. But it seems that Konstantinopol will also fall in days, paving the way for a deeper Russian operation in the sector.
Mark Sloboda, straight out of Moscow. Realize you're a lot closer to being a journalist than these hacks. But Mark, where can people find all your non-journalism online?
Yeah, the whole week has just been nonstop political events, right? Of course, always driven to an extent by what's happening on the battlefield, but what's happening on the battlefield has almost become the background noise to the furor coming out of Washington, out of Brussels, out of Kiev. But I guess today the major news is coming out of Brussels, and the EU declared an emergency summit of European leaders, and for those of you who are willing to wade through the feces, Politico Europe is calling it a war summit. I kid you not, a war summit, right? And by that they don't mean, oh, we're supporting Ukraine. They're talking themselves. Right, that's what they're talking at this point.
They're going to declare war on Trump, I think.
I think they're divided between declaring war on Trump and Russia. Most of them really see it as the same thing at this point, which just goes to show how far down the cuckoo's nest they are. I mean, I don't know. Can I say this on YouTube? But
yeah,
they've gone batshit insane. They've gone batshit insane. All right. And you raised a good question of whether they've become batshit insane or it's just, and they've long been this way, or whether it's just no longer deniable that they are doing it in such a demonstrative way. So yeah, I mean the winner comments are probably coming from the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk and the French President Macron. but von der Leyen, the head of the EU's president of the EU Council, is right up there, right behind them as well. And I think we need to start with Macron, actually, because Macron made a speech where he has said that there will be no peace in Europe. He identified a Russian threat. Russia threatens France itself in cyberspace, in the air, and in the realm of ideas, or
the realm of ideas. Oh my God, that's the worst place to be threatened.
Yeah, something has become a threat to France and Europe. And he said that the only way peace will return to France and Europe is with a pacified Russia. A pacified Russia. I mean, the immediate response was Putin made a comment. Do you remember what happened to Napoleon? I mean,
yeah, the Tsar didn't he like ride into Paris on his horse, kind of leave once the Poland, the Napoleon's army was defeated. I think the Tsar like led the victorious parade into Paris.
It's crazy. I mean, I know Macron thinks of himself. He just thinks that he is the most charming, most capable, most powerful politician in the world. I mean, it's a good question. I mean, if we're going to put up narcissists, if we put up Macron and Trump and Zelensky, I honestly don't know which one is.
Trump loses that. Trump loses that one in a blowout.
Well, at least you could say that Trump, being the president of the United States, with the mantle of the office, at least has some of the power to back that up.
Well, but add this. He had $1 billion company with like resorts all over the world. I'm not saying it was his billion, but this was $1 billion. This was a huge company. He flew around with a 747 or whatever he owned with big Trump words on. He had the Trump hotel. He had some semblance of an empire of his own before he didn't need to become president. He was Trump before president.
Yeah, Trump was a brand.
Exactly. So
gold lame, tacky, hitch.
Exactly. So yeah, he's kind of got an excuse for the narcissism. These other schmucks, get out of here with your Macron, a banker who married his grandmother or something. Forget this guy.
It has to be said that Trump won a convincing second election as president of the United States. And the strong support of now some 50, Trump's approval ratings are looking pretty good. Macron, on the other hand, is despised on his own people and is only still in power because the majority of the vote went to either the Marine Le Pen's National Rally Party, the quote far right, or to Mélenchon's far left alliance. And because they're on either side and can't cooperate with each other, that kind of left Macron surviving, suspended between the two of them, and is still in power in France somehow. But the French people are resolutely against. He once again, along with Keir Starmer, wants to send troops to Ukraine. Something, and ostensibly once a ceasefire takes effect, as sometimes it's billed as peacekeeping forces, and other times they've used this new woke terminology to refer to it as a reassurance force. What the is a reassurance force? I don't even know. I have no idea.
That's like something they say at the Oscars. That's the kind of stuff they say at the Oscars.
Now they're even saying they're not intending that these would be on the contact line, right? They would be hiding in West Ukraine. They would be a human tripwire force, right?
They'd be drinking at the bars in Lvov. That's the best they can do. They'd be drinking at the bars, guaranteed.
So, but I mean, to use language like this, that Russia must be pacified, I mean, that's practically a declaration of war. I mean, that is, you're talking about the country that has the largest nuclear arsenal in the world. And right now, they might have the largest conventional military in the world. They certainly have the largest, they certainly have the most experienced in modern peer-on-peer drone, everything combat. I mean, without the U.S. to back them up. I mean, France and the U.K., the terrible twosome here, they want to send 30,000 troops to Ukraine as a security guarantee for the Kiev regime. But they say that in order to do this, they need a security guarantee from the United States for their troops. What they call
well, let me read this to you, Mark. I got some breaking news, kind of breaking. The LNC Palace confirmed yesterday that Macron plans to travel to Washington together with Starmer and Zelensky. The plan is that President Macron will once again travel to Washington together with Zelensky, and the British Prime Minister, French government spokesman, said without announcing any dates. Macron himself said Wednesday he will confer with European allies on the idea of using France as nuclear deterrent. You heard all of that crap. So now they've come to Trump, and Trump says no. They come back to Trump. Hey, we need a back. No. So then they meet. Meanwhile, Trump is going in the other direction. He's now said there's 240,000 Ukrainians that they allowed in, and gave them special status as immigrants. Trump says that, revoking it, I'm deporting all of them. So they're getting deported. So they're coming to ask this guy for a backstop. And he's like, get out of here, you stinking Ukrainian. Get out of here. He's sick of it. He's sick of here. I think they're going to end up getting punched or something.
It is really amazing. All right. So Macron and then Starmer and then Zelensky came to Washington, right? Last week.
Low curly
and now they want to come again. I mean, how many times can Trump tell them no? I mean, does Trump have to learn French? And I mean,
no.
I guess he would have to learn Russian, because we know that Zelensky really doesn't speak Ukrainian very well. I mean, Russian is his native language, and I don't know. Does he need to speak blue blood or something to communicate effectively with Keir Starmer? I don't know. You would think English, but he doesn't seem to get it through his head. I don't know. I mean, is there some new, novel, interesting way that they can grovel and do submission before Trump that they think will convince him this time? I don't know. I really, they don't. There's all of Europe at this point, right? And I think this, continuing to do the same thing again and again, right? The definition of madness, is just further symptom that the Europeans are delusional. They're still living in a la-la land that the United States emerged from with the Trump administration, amazingly enough, with the Trump administration coming to power. And I mean, this was said outright by Pete Hegseth and echoed by Mark Rubio. What we're talking here is not Russian talking points, right? Or the Russian narrative. We're talking reality. I mean, this is realism. We're recognizing the reality of the situation, what the situation on the battlefield is, and what capabilities we have that could change that. And we can't, right? So they recognize that. So they want to secure a settlement, a peace deal on the best terms that they can possibly get for the Kiev regime now, and for the U.S., must be said. Of course. Because as this goes on, it's only going to get worse. It's not going to get better, right? And Trump said this himself. I mean, they said this. No future, Mike Waltz said this actually, no future, current or future military aid package is going to put Ukraine in a better position, right? Because Russia keeps getting stronger and stronger and stronger. How many times do we need to be reminded by no less a person than the NATO Secretary General, Mark Rutte, that Russia is outproducing all of NATO put together, including the United States, in the type of weapons and munitions needed for this conflict by 3 times. 3 times. Get it through your head. You're not going to win this one. Now, von der Leyen has announced a plan, right? They've got a new cunning plan. She wants to spend something like 840 billion euros, I believe, rearming Europe. That's right. Right. You know, most of it to be invested, I suppose, in the
broomsticks,
rebuilding the military,
the industrial
complex. Whether you're talking the German military, the British military, the French military, I mean, all you have to do is type that and a internal assessment or report, right? And they will show you, they themselves talk about what a sorry state, what a deteriorated state each one of these 3 militaries, supposedly the premier militaries of Europe. Although, to be perfectly honest, the Polish military is certainly in ground forces superior to any of them. I mean, there's really no question there. And they're actually spending a not huge, but a considerable portion of their GDP, their budget on their military, and their military will get stronger in the next few years because they are also buying lots of weapons from South Korea. They're buying equivalent. They're buying HIMARS. They're buying South Korean equivalent of HIMARS. They're building tanks. All of these sorts of things. They're building it quietly, but it's still going to take years. And what she's talking, first of all, this 840 billion euros. Where are they going to get this 840 billion euros from? Debt. They say it right out. Debt, more debt, right? Each one of the European countries, with the exception of Germany, who is almost there and is only not there because it was in their constitution, but each one of their economies is already, the governments are in debt more than 100% of GDP. In some of their cases, considerably more. And Germany intends to remove restrictions on spending now on military stuff so that they can go over 100% of GDP in debt. This is all debt. They're going to put all of their people even further into the hawk, the future generations. And here's going to be always the problem with the EU and investing in their military industrial complex, because the bang they get for the buck, the euro, is a fraction. Why? Because their military industrial complex is spread out and splintered among all their respective little different countries who have all their unique, sovereign weapon systems and pork, right? That it goes to their own military industrial complex, produced in relatively small numbers and with very limited ability to use these weapons in any type of really cooperative way with other NATO members. We were long told about NATO's standard 155 millimeter artillery rounds, right? There's one thing that we discovered during the Ukraine conflict is those NATO standard 155 millimeter artillery rounds aren't that standard. And that most of them can't be used interchangeably with each other's artillery systems, because although they're 155 millimeters, the differences are still significant enough that most of them can't be used in each other's artillery pieces. This is why Europe is splintered and will never be a great power, will never be a military power. And they're talking openly. They want an arms race with Russia, right? That is, with the presumption right here, Russia must be pacified, right? Or Donald Tusk, the Polish president, he echoed. He said, let's see here. What did he say? He was commenting on the state of the what he sees as a Cold War, or as a new arms race with Russia, because that's what they are all talking about. And he said, Europe as a whole is truly capable of winning any confrontation, financial, economic, military, and Russian. We are simply stronger. We just need to start believing it. It's just, I mean,
we just need to believe we're stronger. That's all they need.
Can you please cue, I believe I can fly? Right. This is ludicrous. And the splintered military industrial complex, first of all any investment they do get will take years and years to show any results, right? Once they start investing it. And even if this conflict goes on for a while longer, which they obviously intend for it to do so, it will take years, well past that, to have any effect on this conflict. I mean, it is just, it is a fantasy. They are living in a fantasy land. They are not going to be a military great power. I mean, they're having to work around, because first of all of their countries don't even agree, right? I mean, Orban in Hungary and Robert Fico in Slovakia want nothing to do with any of this. Orban says he's okay with increasing Europe's defensive capacity. He's on board with that, but not more aid to Ukraine, not a continuation of this conflict. But I believe that on there's probably several levels, right? Because they always justify these things with more than one level or more than one reason when politicians do something. It's never just one reason. But one of the reasons they are making such a noise and presenting to Trump their peace plan now, trying to make a show that they're on board with him or they're speaking his language, about putting British and French and other European troops as peacekeepers on the ground. They know very well that Russia won't accept that, right? Russia says it again and again and again, right? It's not that they're not listening. It's they're saying this because they know Russia won't agree to this, right? So if they manage to convince Trump to make this part of, the peace negotiation settlement demands from himself and the rest of the West, if they get on board behind him on this, is that Russia will say no and the war will continue, which is what they want. They don't want, right now, the only one who wants a ceasefire and peace as things stand is Trump. No one else does, right? Russia doesn't, because they're winning, right? And they can't, they know that the West won't agree to their terms. And at this point, they're starting to think, you know what? This is never going to end unless we purge this regime, root and branch out of Kiev and possibly Lvov even. They're looking big now, all right, because they see no possibility of this ending. They hear the Europeans talking like this and they're like, oh my God, we can't leave Ukraine to just be armed and prepped again. So we have to fight this again in another few years. So Russia is not ready Russia says no ceasefire, and they're not ready for peace on any terms that the West can accept, including, I believe, the United States. But who knows? Because Donald Trump has floored me with some of the things he's done. So maybe he would be willing to accept the Russian terms. I don't know. But the Kiev regime doesn't want peace because they don't accept, right, anything, right? They're still set on, they're even more, Zelensky is even more delusional than European leaders, right? We heard and you don't have to talk to us, right? Just refer to what the Western mainstream media says that his own officials in his own regime say about him, right? We're already going on 2 years now since Simon Schuster interviewed Ukrainian officials for Time magazine, right? And they said Zelensky is delusional, that you can't tell him anything about the real state of the conflict, and that he is an emperor with no clothes, right? Not me, right? I mean, I certainly agree with that, but that's according to his own officials speaking to a reporter from Time magazine. And this week, Der Spiegel put out a piece, the German political magazine, Der Spiegel, one of the top publication in Germany. They also did an interview with some of Zelensky's own officials, and they said he has the mentality of a child, of a spoiled child who throws tantrums. The mentality of a child, right? Boom. I mean, so you don't even need to listen to Russian propaganda on this. The Western mainstream media usually admits all of these things, right? It just gets buried, and it never is allowed to change the narrative, right? It's always buried somewhere in Article 15 and some back page or buried somewhere online. But they've admitted all of these things. They at some point they just don't let it change the narrative, and they're operating according to the narrative. So he refuses to accept any concessions to Russia, much less what Russia is actually demanding. And Europe obviously doesn't want peace, right? They do not accept losing to Russia. It challenges their identity. How could they lose? Europe is the shining, the other shining city on the hill. They've fully bought into the idea of U.S. exceptionalism. They just express it as Western exceptionalism. They believe that they are structurally, societally, and morally superior to everyone else in the world, right? The garden and the jungle, as Joseph Borrell told us, echoing the U.S. arch neocon Robert Kagan. They believe all this. They can't lose to Russia. All right, they would then fall under the sway of Russia as a dominant great power, particularly if the U.S. is really intent on pivoting away from Europe towards Asia, right? And they first of all, they don't want that. Certainly not under the terms that it's happening. And they just can't accept losing to Russia. It challenges their most basic beliefs about who and what they are, and who and what Russia is, and their respective places in the world. So they are obviously, no, that's not saying that the European people are on board with this as a whole, right? But we're talking foreign policy, so that doesn't always really matter, right? Because like in the United States, most of the time Europeans don't vote according to foreign policy, right? They vote according to domestic issues, like most people, right? Most people in most countries, most times and places. And a lot of these officials, von der Leyen, whoever elected her, she was never elected. I mean, she never had to convince constituents or something like this. So they feel very confident in pushing a new, arms race, a new cold, hot war with Russia, and they're openly talking now about beating Russia militarily, about pacifying Russia. And I mean, I don't know how many times Russia has seen this historically. I mean, back to, Charles of Sweden, Napoleon, Hitler, right? And
Crimean War, on and on.
The Crimean War. Who are these people? Macron? Right? Starmer, I mean, you're not even in the same historical league. Get over yourselves.
Here's something.
Yeah.
But here's an interesting. Okay, Fox News is reporting the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, U.S. Envoy Steve Witkoff, and White House National Security Advisor Mike Waltz will head to Riyadh on March 11th to meet with Ukrainian officials, including Ukrainian Chief of Staff Andrei Yermak. I don't see Yermak. I don't see Zelensky's name. And I also think this. Now, they're coming, Zelensky, Starmer, and Macron are coming to meet with Trump. Here's the other part of it. Because they've told Zelensky, you need to make up with Trump. I think it may not be just that they're coming there to throw them their latest, oh, you've got to be the backstop for us and give us security guarantees. I think it's also they feel that they're going to make up, Zelensky, they're going to come in there, and while he won't say he's sorry, because he's never going to say that, at least maybe they can find a way to patch things up with Trump, which they can't. But, it's, again, the delusion of them. But so now, March 11th, Ukrainian officials in Riyadh. Your thoughts? I mean, these people, so what? They're going to go there with the same old stuff. We've got a plan. Read it. And they're going to say, but this is the plan you keep giving us over and over, where the Russians have to, throw in the towel. I think they're just, they're going to try to, they want the weapons to start flowing heavy again and all that stuff. And they're just going to try to say, what do we need to say?
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, it is significant. Not only has the U.S. Stopped the flow of weapons now, right? Not only are they not making any new weapons packages, but they actually stopped the shipment of weapons that were ordered, right, from the U.S. military-industrial complex during the Biden administration, right? They actually stopped them en route. They made planes turn around. They've also now shut off the flow of U.S. Intelligence to the Kiev regime. And a lot of people really, really underestimate the value that this has and the importance that this has had in keeping the Kiev regime afloat for the last 3 years, right? And able to defend and strike back against Russia. Now, there's an open question about this, right? There's different sources saying what level, what degree of intelligence is blocked. Some people say it's all of it. Some people say it's just offensive, right? Preventing intelligence that is not being provided, preventing any long-range strikes, something like that. And then we have other sources, including Politico, saying that the Europeans, the Trump administration has an intelligence sharing network that is particularly intelligence sharing, particularly strong with the Five Eyes global spying cabal, right? The 5 English-speaking countries, right? Which is the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia. And they told the United Kingdom that they aren't allowed to share intelligence on the conflict with Ukraine. And they basically said outright, the British and French both said, we're going to share everything with the Ukrainians anyway. We don't care, right? They outright said, we have assets on the ground and the information will be passed to them. And, what are they going to do about it? So they basically said this. So, but it's still, even if they're getting most of the same intelligence, there will obviously be a greater delay and some obstruction. And I believe it will still have some effect, right? Even if they're not getting completely cut off from intelligence. The U.S. satellite data primarily is what we're talking there. But also a lot of NATO reconnaissance data going on over the Black Sea and the Baltic Sea. That's not affected either, except for specifically U.S. Aircraft involved in that. And every day there are NATO aircraft doing circles in the Black Sea and the Baltic Sea every day, several ships, right? Constantly, collecting as much information that they can, signals intelligence and other information to pass on to the Kiev regime. We also have reports from on the ground, and take these for what they are, as reports, although it's also starting to be discussed in the Western mainstream media, that Starlink, that the Kiev regime forces use of Starlink is experiencing, quote unquote, rolling blackouts, right? And they're not talking about Russian jamming, because Russia has demonstrated the ability to at least locally jam Starlink. And Starlink has been absolutely essential to allow the Kiev regime to conduct military communications, because Russia's electronic warfare was blocking it in the beginning of the conflict almost completely. And it also, for instance, allows them to fly their drones, right? Most of their drones are flown through Starlink. So that will be a major impediment for them as well, even if it continues to be on, facing interruption and things like that. But it does tell us that the Trump administration is at least serious about using this leverage to force the Ukrainians to start negotiations. Now, whether that is when Trump turns the spigot of weapons and intelligence and communications back on, right? We don't know. We really, no one knows what's going on in Trump's head. And if anyone tells you that they do, I'll tell you they're lying. I am giving up on predicting what Trump is going to do, because I don't have a good track record in it. Not that I think that anyone necessarily does have a better track record. But he's too unpredictable, which is exactly what Russia, what Putin said, that Kamala Harris is predictable. In this particular case, right now, the unpredictability is working in Russia's advantage. Not so much for the people in Gaza or China or somewhere else, right? That's the nature of the beast.
But, the thing about it is you did, because you referred to him as a chaos bomb.
Yeah, chaos bomb.
Now, and my position with him was, I don't pay any attention to what he says. I'd be like, same thing. I've given up on predicting. I just watch what he does and tries to figure out. Or if I'm going to, when he says something like, Gaza's bombing everybody if they don't do what I want. And then today we find out that that his people are meeting with Hamas, which is unthinkable in the United States. So I'm like this. Either I ignore it or I say, well, he's probably going to do the opposite. But I'm never going to look at what he says and try to judge based on anything that he shared. That in no way implies anything, because I don't know if he really thinks that. And like 5 minutes later, he just changes his mind and says, I think I'll do something else. Or if that's intent, who knows anymore.
Because 2 weeks ago, he called Zelensky a dictator. And I was like floored. I'm making so many reassessments on that, right? I'm like, you can't just walk. I said, you can't just walk that back. The U.S. president has correctly identified him as a dictator. And what did he say in the last week? A dictator, asked it by a journalist. Did I say Zelensky was a dictator? I don't remember saying that. Next question. I'm like, oh my God.
Only Trump. But you know what it is? He just keeps the people going like, what? He just keeps everybody doing that. And
he's got me doing it. So,
for whatever reason, it works for him. It worked for him. Oh, I hope they televise the meeting with with Macron and Starmer and Zelensky.
They won't do it. They absolutely will not do that again. I'm quite sure that they will not want any type of possibility of a repeat of the fracas in the White House, right? The battle of the Oval Office. They absolutely will not want that. I mean, there might be a staged presser, right, afterwards or something like that if it happens. But I really don't know what they think they're going to get that they haven't gotten already. I mean, I know that Trump, do they think that Trump is really interested in this minerals deal? Or because I think that this was all a red herring. I think Trump knows that Ukraine doesn't really have that much that's worth that much, and that it would require, more than a decade of investment to get anything profitable. And Russia already controls much of that wealth anyway. This was part of a political game that was being played, and they're trying to bill it now that Trump viewed that as some type of informal security guarantee, right? But the idea was that, if U.S. workers were on the ground, then Russia wouldn't dare to invade Ukraine again. Well, I mean, why are we talking again? Because as far as I'm concerned, the SMO is still going, and Russia's given no suggestion they have any intention of even slowing it down, much less stopping it. All right. In fact, they're going to accelerate it, almost certainly. Look for big offensives in the next couple of months. But
add this. It was only supposed to happen after a peace agreement anyway. So in theory, if it was going to happen after a peace agreement, that would mean that Russia had signed it, which would mean they got what they want. So that wouldn't be relative anyway.
Yeah. Well, this is the way some of the Trump people were presenting it. Some of the Trump administration were presenting it, talking to the press in the aftermath of this, saying that the Trump White House viewed this as a test. Since this security guarantee would only even conceivably come into effect once there actually was a peace, then that was a test, right? So you'll get an informal security guarantee, but only once we actually have peace on the ground, right? That would allow the U.S. to come in and exploit the hell out of whatever they could vampirize out of Ukraine, right? So they view that's the way they're spinning it now. And that seems plausible, right? Because nothing about this deal ever made sense to me. And again, this is unconfirmed, but there are Ukrainian media outlets, particularly in Telegram, which has a little bit more freedom outside of the unified information policy of the Zelensky regime. But Resident UA, one of their better, generally patriotic but willing to be critical Telegram channels, and a few other sources have been suggesting that actually Zelensky already signed away all these minerals to the United Kingdom as part of this 100-year security guarantee that Keir Starmer supposedly signed with them. Okay, so first of all, let's point out the ludicrous of this, right? He promised 100 years of security guarantee to Ukraine. At the same time, he's demanding a security guarantee from the United States for his forces so he can provide a security guarantee to Ukraine. It's like yes minister stuff, right? I mean, if you've ever seen the old British political comedy, we really, unfortunately, you can't make that today because it would really be called for in this particular and many other similar situations. But if that's true, that might explain a lot of the intrigue that is going on here. And they pointed out that, of course, U.S. intelligence would have known this and would have told the Trump administration. In this case, maybe Trump was giving them all enough rope to hang themselves and still may, right? Who knows?
Maybe yanking the Brits chain a little bit too.
What I will say is what it is clear to me. I feel no doubt in saying there is far more political intrigue behind this minerals deal than on the face of it, right? It is not just Trump and greed and getting some money and giving or not giving something in return. There is some type of political intrigue going on here, whether it's really about security guarantees, peace negotiations, or whether it was already promised to the British and the Trump administration is just waiting for the right time to, for them to hang themselves on it. We don't know. We don't know. That part of it at least is unconfirmed.
RT across the top of their thing. They're in red. It says Washington reportedly seeks replacement for Zelensky. Right.
Yeah.
So now I would say this. I don't need a little red, at RT, they put the little red like lightning bolt there. I don't need a little red lightning bolt to know that. I think I could have told you that after that meeting. Now, the word is they're talking to other people, be it Poroshenko or, people are talking about some of the other people who would be totally unacceptable to Russia anyway. But
they're all unacceptable.
Exactly.
They're all Maidan people.
Exactly.
So who are they talking about? This is interesting. Politico is reporting this. Supposedly, the U.S. is reaching out to Poroshenko, right? The Candy oligarch, the former president of the Kiev regime, whom Zelensky in a sham election, whatever, but Poroshenko was wiped out, right? Because the Ukrainian people were so desperate for a change, and particularly East Ukrainians voted for, if they did vote, a lot of them didn't vote, but those that did vote, they voted for Zelensky because they believe that he would bring peace, because that's kind of what he campaigned on, right? He never said how he would bring peace, right? All of the nationalists, they all voted for Poroshenko or some other crazy little candidate, right? Because he was seen as the West Ukrainian supporter. So Poroshenko, they're talking to Poroshenko, which is, you're going to go back to the guy that Zelensky beat soundly? And he became an ultra-nationalist himself, so I'm not sure that benefits. Timoshenko, the gas princess, the oligarch who got rich by buying Russian gas and then at discounts and then reselling it elsewhere, and stealing a lot of the gas too, it must be said. She was the prime minister of Ukraine under the Orange Revolution, and her star has faded. She's supported, politically, even in the last decade, by particularly older people in North and Central Ukraine, particularly pensioners, for some reason, gravitated onto her. But that would be a real stretch. And while Russia has dealt with her before, I know, and she is a political, evidently somehow she finagled an invitation to Trump's inauguration. She was there. Zelensky couldn't get an invitation, but somehow she was, which I find interesting. But obviously, she's she's always intriguing. She intrigues like so she breathes. So there's another possibility. The Maidan leader who has became then the mayor of Kiev and has ever been self, Vitaly Klitschko, right? He is within the Maidan regime a critic of Zelensky, has called him a dictator. But only because he took power away from the rest of the Maidan forces. Taking it away from all of East Ukraine, that's fine, right? Banning all those parties, that's fine. But, taking power, consolidating power away from the other Maidan parties, that wasn't cool. Anyway, he's not the sharpest tool in the shed. Even Victoria Nuland, when her and Jeffrey Piat, the U.S. ambassador back in 2014, were caught on tape deciding who the next prime minister would be, and the Europeans were interested in Klitschko, and Victoria Nuland's like, no, he's on training wheels. Yatsenyuk, who was their man for the next prime minister, and let him, earn his training wheels, and so I don't think he's regarded any more seriously now. That's who the U.S. And I saw another reference that they might be talking to Budanov, right? Kirilo, I like the dark Budanov, the sociopathic head of Ukrainian military intelligence, who was groomed and brought up to that position by U.S. intelligence. He's a fanatic, an anti-Russian hating fanatic. He certainly wouldn't be any more amenable in peace negotiations. And then you have the figure of Zelensky. And interestingly, Politico doesn't bring up that the administration is talking to Zelensky, right? Even though he's usually presented as the other figure who would be more popular with the Ukrainian population, right? And my argument was, if you put Zelensky on a ballot with a blind, deaf, and dumb donkey, right, the Ukrainian people would vote for the blind, deaf, and dumb donkey over Zelensky. But Zelensky is a Banderite fascist. He is a true believer. He had 2 busts of Bandera and one of Shukovich and the big red and black flag in his military office when he was heading the Ukrainian military. And he's come out in the past. He's been floating around this Brussels summit and some previous meetings, and he's outright said Trump is destroying the world order, right? So I seriously doubt that the Trump administration is looking at him as an alternative leader for Ukraine. That's why his name is not being mentioned. If you're wondering why Zelensky, the Europeans might love Zelensky, right? He might be their man now, right? But all of that is how. Because Zelensky is refusing elections. The Rada has passed a bill saying there won't be any elections during wartime, and we stand. They had to pass it on the second vote because in the first vote they voted against it. But he made them vote again until they gave him the right answer.
Wow. And so here we sit with the Russians must be thinking, was it Voltaire who said my only prayer was to make my enemies fools, and that prayer was granted. I think that's I think that's what they got to be looking at. Let me ask you this, last but not least, before we run out the door, what's happening on the ground in the battlefield, Mark?
Okay, so it's a mixed story. The Kiev regime has launched some big counteroffensives that's not being reported on widely at all, not in the alt media, not even in the mainstream media. Touretsk, which Russia had taken, right, really effectively over a month ago, and then it was finally reported. But the Kiev regime has, in the recent days, sent forces, big counteroffensive, obviously timed with information warfare in mind, with the summit in Brussels and the visit to the U.S. in mind. And they've seized, by some accounts, 15% of the city back, and they're trying to dig in and drive the Russians back further. They also launched a big, I don't want to say counteroffensive, but counterattacks south of Pokrovsk as well, trying to prevent the noose from being drawn around their necks. Now, they're having some success with these things, right? Now, I will point out that they have launched counterattacks before. They don't have the ability. These are not going to last. They are part of the ebb and flow of battle, and all of the resources that the Kiev regime is wasting on these counterattacks is, in the medium term, only going to hurt them, right? Some short-term information headlines, oh, we've still got a piece of Touretsk, haha, you didn't take it. But they're wasting a huge amount of resources in the process. And it's been written about in U.S. Military journals, how the Russians have a habit of deliberately sometimes falling back in the face of such counterattacks in order to lure them in. Now, I don't know if that's the position or not, or whether Russia just was neglecting the Touretsk area, having all but taken Touretsk itself, and then neglected to keep enough forces in the face of a counterattack, and the Kiev regime identified a temporary weakness, and Russia will have to redistribute forces to take it back. It may take some time. It's a little embarrassing, but this is part of the ebb and flow of battle. This is not some sea change in what is happening in the conflict. It's annoying, right? It's, shall we say, a little embarrassing. It's like what the Kursk incursion was, right? But we can all see now that the Kursk incursion has cost the Kiev regime so much in terms of men and equipment and manpower, right? All of these forces would be better spent in defensive positions than in counterattacks. But Zelensky has a eternal habit of demanding military action for political reasons, something that the Russian government has never done, at least not since the first few months of the war, right? After the fiasco of the Istanbul communique and Russia withdrawing troops from around Kiev, and everything is part of that deal, and then the Ukrainians saying, "Ha ha, no peace," right? We mobilized. We now have a much larger military. We're getting all the U.S. military equipment. Anyway, since then, Russia, the military decisions are left to the generals. The Russian military does not make decisions in their strategy or tactics based on some date, some meeting, some artificial timetable. Putin doesn't interfere, right? And he's made that perfectly clear, and I've heard nothing to, everything says that that's what's happening. But the Kiev regime does the opposite, and this is wasted counterattacks that aren't going to change the ultimate course of the battle, either in that particular area or in the long-term conflict made for political reasons. And that is, again, Russians are quite happy with Zelensky as the leader, because when he makes these things, he's helping them attrit ultimately he's helping them attrit the Kiev regime's military capability away faster.
And politically speaking, anytime he wants to go visit Donald Trump, the Russians will probably put the bill for his plane ticket. Go see him again. Have a talk with the guy. They're probably thrilled to see well, as would be more appropriate, Larry, Moe, and Curly, Macron, Zelensky, and Starmer heading back, because, I mean, these guys, I just can't imagine that anybody could screw anything up any worse than these clowns going back to. I just cannot imagine, after everything that's happened, that they're like, "Hey, I got a great idea. Let's take Zelensky. We'll go back to D.C. and we'll meet." But it makes as much sense as everything else. What the hell?
Anyway, where Russia is having offensives and success on the battlefield right now is Zaporozhye, up the south. They're tightening the noose in the Kursk region around that Suja salient that Zelensky is still trying to keep open and failing. And very quietly, there's a pretty significant Russian. What?
How many? The Suja salient. How many? If they end up forming a cauldron, as the term we always say, how many troops are in that area that would probably be? Do they know?
Yeah, somewhere between 10 and 20,000. 10 and 20,000, right? I mean, they'll try to get out.
They're effectively cut off now, aren't they?
Yeah, their only real supply line is one road, and that's under complete Russian drone and artillery control at the moment. They're in a really bad situation, and the weather is really warm. It's all above zero in Ukraine and that part of Russia right now, and it's mud. Right, it's all mud, so you can't do anything off-road. It's all got to be on roads. So that's really inhibiting them there. The other one that no one's talking about is Russia's begun a pretty significant offensive in the Kharkov region, on the other side of the Oskol River, towards Kupiansk and Liman, and they're making really rapid progress there. And you could see things happen in Kupiansk and Liman a lot faster. Right, Russia withdrew from this area because the Kiev regime mobilized and they didn't have the manpower, so they just pulled out of it back in the autumn of 2022, right? If people who remember that, it was billed as a Kiev regime victory. Not really. It was more about maneuver and manpower, and the Russians withdrew in good order. But now they're back again, and they're going to take Kupiansk and Liman a lot faster than a lot of people think, and that's going to facilitate this move on Slavyansk and Kramatorsk from the north.
Yeah, well, the Russians better watch out, because before you know it, there could be European troops showing up with sharpened broomsticks. Yeah, somebody could get an eye put out, man. Somebody get their eyes poked with one of those things. It's
all
very,
of this
dangerous.
Is happening. All of this intrigue and noise and everything in D.C. and Brussels and Kiev, and the Russian military just keeps doing what they're doing. Stay the course.
Maintain course and speed, as we say in the boating world. All right, Mark. Well, where can
Rubio officially ends this debate on the Ukraine war after saying the quiet part out loud, admitting this is nothing more than a proxy war on behalf of the United States. In a recent interview on Fox News, Marco Rubio admits that the war between Russia and Ukraine is nothing more than a proxy war being fought by Ukraine on behalf of the United States and their allies.
It's been very clear from the beginning that President Trump views this as a protracted, stalemated conflict, and frankly, it's a proxy war between nuclear powers, the United States helping Ukraine and Russia. And it needs to come to an end. And no one has any idea or any plan to bring it to an end. The plan of the Ukrainians up to now and their allies, Capitol Hill, and the people you talk to in other countries is, let's just keep giving them as much as they need for as long as it takes. That's not a strategy.
I know. Some of those pro-Ukraine weirdos out there are going to try to convince you this is just Russian disinformation and that Rubio is simply following the lead of the Putin puppet, Donald Trump, except for the British Russophobe and the former Prime Minister of the UK, Boris Mop Top Johnson, also admits that this is nothing more than a proxy war, except for, in his logic, he uses this talking point to justify sending more weapons and money to Ukraine.
We are, let's face it, we're waging a proxy war. We're waging a proxy war, but we're not giving our proxies the ability to do the job. And for years and years now, we've been allowing them to fight with one hand tied behind their backs, and it has been cruel. It has been cruel, and we need now to give them what they need.
So I doubt that Boris Johnson and Marco Rubio are saying the same talking point, and that talking point happens to be Russian disinformation, despite the fact that they're using that talking point to argue two different sides of the arguments. In Marco Rubio's case, to argue for peace and negotiations, and in Boris Johnson's case, to argue continuing the war and giving unlimited funding and weapons. But if both sides of the argument have presented the point that this is indeed a proxy war on behalf of NATO, then we know a few things for sure. This war has nothing to do with defending democracy, like the pro-Ukraine side has claimed. The fact that Boris Johnson is admitting that this is a proxy war effectively on behalf of NATO and their alliance, and that he is one of the ones who sabotaged the peace talks and caused war to begin with, lets us know that it was in fact NATO that coerced Ukraine into baiting Russia into defending their sovereignty in order to protect their borders. And since they are admitting that Ukraine is a quote-unquote proxy of NATO and its allies, they would never admit all of the crimes that the Ukrainian government has been guilty of since the Maidan coup was committed in 2014. Namely, bombing Donbass, bombing Crimea, bombing East Ukraine, and supporting and emboldening neo-Nazis, not to mention all the ethnic Russians they've killed in the last 10 years, seemingly taking advantage of the fact that Putin has always been willing to show restraint regarding that issue. In other words, NATO is assisting in facilitating the destruction of entire generations of Ukrainian men for their own interests. And it actually has nothing to do with the sovereignty of Ukraine. Because let's be honest, if they actually did care about Ukraine, they would, one, try to bring about peace no matter what the cost is, but also they probably wouldn't have helped Ukraine start a war they know they can't win. And like Marco Rubio has said, and I have said time and time again, ladies and gentlemen, if they cared about Ukraine and these people who keep cheering for us to continue funding this war would have a plan on how to end it. And none of them do, because once again, they don't actually care about Ukraine. So facts, ladies and gentlemen, are not Russian disinformation. So if you haven't believed me or anybody else when we've told you this war has always been about the United States, NATO, and that alliance and their interests, well, don't listen to me. Listen to them, because they've already told you, unless Putin's biggest haters are also Putin puppets as well.
New developments in the U.S. as they talk with Ukraine, and the Trump administration suspends aid and intel sharing. That came out yesterday, and is now reportedly planning to revoke the legal status of nearly 250,000 Ukrainians.
Now, this is the best part. 250,000, a bunch of military age Ukrainians. Good. They got to leave the country, bro. These people are going to be committing terrorism in America real soon, and Trump knows it. His intel services has already told him that these people, drone operators, they will cause havoc in America. These is military men. They've been fled Ukraine for Plan B to bring down America, so they got to go.
Who have fled here since the war began. Special envoy to Russia and Ukraine, General Keith Kellogg, joins us now. General, I know there was an emergency meeting of European allies without us yesterday in response to our pause in weapons and our hold off on sharing intelligence. What do you think comes from that, and what's the U.S. stance about that?
Yeah, Brian, thanks for having me this morning. It's good to be with you. Look, this goes back to what President Trump has said all along. That to start with, and he's absolutely right, this war would not have started if he was president of the United States. But he's been looking at this for a long time. This isn't something he just came into on the 20th of January when he was inaugurated. He's been thinking about it, working about it. I mean, I remember him being on the campaign trail a year ago when we actually talked about it when we went into Iowa. And look, he's basically said, look, this war is an endless war right now. It's in almost a stalemate condition, and this war's got to stop.
No, it's not.
What you're looking at, the levels of destruction is horrific. It's World War II level of destruction. And the president sees that, and he said consistently that he wants the war to stop. He needs to end the killing. He's been very, very good at that. And when he looks at the Europeans, he's trying to bring them along the same way, saying, look, you've got to come to some type of negotiated solution to this. This war is not going to be decided on the battlefield. It's just not. Because both sides are dug in, they're entrenched, and the president sees diplomacy, and he's very good at this on coming to a solution. And look what he's done in the last 40 days. I mean, he's had Steve Witkoff talking to Putin in Moscow. You know, I've been into Kiev talking to Zelensky. He's got an all-star team. When you look at Bessent from Treasury, and you look at Steve Witkoff, the special negotiator that working with Russia. When you look at Letnick, you look at Mike Waltz. It's an all-star team that's got a full court press on trying to bring this to a resolution, and he's trying to bring the Europeans.
But General,
with him.
So we know the deal.
If you don't do it, don't do it.
Right. So, General, we know that it looks like they're ready to sign the minerals deal as it looks. I don't know if they need to see each other face to face. They could do a docu-sign. We do that every day, and then we get to it. Now, besides Russia talking to Witkoff, and saying to President Trump personally they're ready for peace, where is any Russian give? When can we see if Russia is actually going to do something substantial, any type of confidence building on their end? Because yesterday they're still bombing cities and hospitals.
That's what happened when negotiations go on.
Well, you know, Ryan, this is a war. This is the reason why President Trump wants it to stop. You know, war's not pristine, and that's where President Trump really sees that, and he sees the horrific casualties and the damage to the cities. And he made that comment earlier last Friday when he talked about the damage to the cities. Look at Mariupol, a major city absolutely destroyed. I've been inside Izium, which was a city of 70,000 down to 20,000, and the destruction I saw there. The president gets it; he sees it where he wants to go. He's got Steve talking to the Russians, talking personally to President Putin. And we've got a set of conditions, what we know that Steve's come back with. We've gone to the Ukrainians and talked to them, and we're going to continue to talk to the Ukrainians to get confidence-building measures that we can bring to the president. And we can say, okay, this is the way it stands on both sides. This is where you want to go. It's not an easy process. It's a really difficult process. The president has said that. You know, he made the comment that the Mideast is kind of easy compared to this. So he's actually working it hard.
Right. So
he's got a great team in place and synchronized going forward.
Now, being that we know where we're at, when do we think we're going to have more Russian talks? When do you think we're going to have the more? Ukraine has already pretty much said, we'll sign the deal. We're ready to talk. So what's the next move with Russia?
Well, that's one of those where I think it's internal to the White House. The discussions going forward. You know, Steve's got that. Mike Waltz has got that. Marco Rubio's got that, and Marco's the chief diplomat of the United States of America. It's really on his plate to move that forward. So I don't want to get ahead of the president. I would never do that. This is his decision to make. He's the president, and we'll go from there.
But I'll tell you, no American knows more about what this war's been like on the ground than you. You've been doing this as a private citizen. That's why you're the perfect pick. I got to ask you to tap into your years of the military experience for this one, though. The Gaza war and IDF and phase one of the peace deal. Yesterday, the president put out a Truth Social post after meeting with some of the surviving hostages. He said, Shalom Hamas means hello and goodbye. You can choose. Release all of the hostages now, not later, and immediately return all of the dead bodies of the people you murdered, or it's over for you. Release the hostages now, or there will be hell to pay. It's a little bit longer, but you get the theme. He says, I'm going to give the IDF everything they need to finish you off. What does it get in the mind of a terrorist? How are they going to internalize this?
Well, they're not reading the room very well. Look, Eden Alexander is the last American alive that's a hostage, and they've got 4 dead Americans they want to bring back to the United States. Look, this is something you guys just don't read President Trump very well. I go back to 2020, the last State of the Union, when in closing comments he made, if you harm an American, your life is forfeit. And this months after that, we went and picked up a guy named Philip Watson in Africa. We sent SEAL Team 6 in there just to get one single American. That's the way the president thinks. It's almost like you're not reading the room, you're not reading the individual as the president of the United States. He's been very, very clear. And they just don't seem to get it. And he's absolutely right. No, and the president has called this one right on the money. So if I was Hamas, I'd say, you know something, just release Alexander, get him back to the United States, release the 4 bodies that we believe you still have, and let's close this deal out. Otherwise, you're going to pay a horrible price. But this is not anything new with President Trump. But real it's the way he is. It's the way he operates.
Adam Boehler met face-to-face with Hamas leadership. Are you okay with that? And what do you think that does?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, Adam Boehler, that's his job to do that. And Caroline Levitt made those comments yesterday. This is the job of the special envoy for hostage affairs. And Adam's doing that. And Adam's very, very talented to do that. We just want to get the American back. Eden Alexander, he's the last one there. Bring him home. And that's what we're going to do. I think nobody can question, our efforts with Israel and supporting Israel against Hamas and Hezbollah as well, and also Iran. And this is just...
Oh, Trump shouldn't have said that shit. All that bluffing with Hamas, it look bad every time he do it. Because the U.S. not finna go in no tunnels and fight Hamas. All this is tough talk. Hamas want that. It's gonna be glory to fight the U.S. on the ground. But the Zionists got Trump talking like that.
Let's talk about Europe. So European leaders today are telling Europe to prepare for war. French President Emmanuel Macron addressed Europe last night, saying that Europe will not accept capitulation of Ukraine to Russia under the guise of peace negotiations. So like peace negotiations where people don't die is a guise?
They can't do nothing about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fool me. Okay. And the Danish prime minister says, quote, peace in Ukraine is more dangerous than war in Ukraine. Like, Europe has gone absolutely mad. Those are the words of the warmongering Danish Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen. Listen to her in her own words, and here it is subtitled.
I don't think we should panic, but I think we are in a hurry. And I think we have been in a hurry for...
If it weren't for the Russia and the U.S., it wouldn't even be no fucking Europe right now. After World War II, especially when it be no France, they surrendered like some phonies to Germany. They should teach that in school. They were part of... We're doing World War II. It wasn't no country called France. They surrendered. Imagine that Germany took over France. But the U.S. allowed it to be a Britain and Italy and Spain. That's true. Or Russia would have just took the whole Europe. They need to be more grateful. Without the U.S. stepping in, Russia would have took the whole Europe for themselves after World War II. See, these bastards. But one thing they better understand is the U.S. know how weak they really is. And the U.S. know if they leave Europe, Russia wipe them out right now.
For 3 years, but now we really have to scale up and to speed up because Russia and Putin is not only threatening Ukraine, but all of us. And we have to be able to defend ourselves. My idea about Ukraine is the same as it has been now for 3 years, that they have to win this war. And if we allow Russia to win the war, I'm sorry to say it directly to all of you, he will continue and they will continue. And maybe we will even give them a better situation than today, because if we end this war now with some kind of a frozen conflict, a ceasefire, it will give Russia the possibility to return to Russia, to mobilize more funds, people, and maybe to attack another country in Europe.
Nobody pulled the microphone back and said, what proof do you have of that, given that Russia has specifically said they're not interested in any more than the contested regions that have been long since fired upon by Ukraine? So on what basis are you spewing these possibilities? Nobody's asking those questions. They're allowed to just say, he's coming for all of us, not based on any facts. I mean, this is a playbook from Orwell. This is 1984. Speak where peace means war and war means peace and death means life. There's no other way to see it.
Well, look at those microphones that are shoved in her face. I mean, Philip, if you can just show those microphones again and just play it without audio here, you can see Reuters, France 24. These are all. There's DW. These are all these are all corporate media organizations. Al Jazeera. But you're not going to get any independent journalists asking those questions because you're really. Independent journalism in Europe is not a thing. You have state-run media, basically. So that's what you have there. You're not going to get those answers. Elon Musk tweeted this. Then shortly after that, they want the forever war. How many more parents with no sons? How many more children with no fathers? By their logic, it never ends in Europe. So today is a huge day in Europe. European leaders coming together to hold an emergency summit over Ukraine, pushing for more war against Russia, while President Trump is pushing for peace right now. The cocaine-sniffing troll Zelensky, of course, was there in Brussels, of course, today to ask for more money, for more weapons, to thank them for not ending the war. Those were his words. The unelected leader of Europe, Ursula von der Leyen, was also on hand to tell us how important attacking Russia really is. And she announced the new Rearm Europe plan. Watch.
Europe faces a clear and present danger. And therefore, Europe has to be able to protect itself, to defend itself, as we have to put Ukraine in a position to protect itself and to push for a lasting and just peace. I present today to the leaders the Rearm Europe plan. The Rearm Europe plan provides up to 800 billion euros for defense investment. It gives the member states fiscal space to invest in defense. It gives the member states possibility to invest in the Ukrainian defense industry or to procure military capabilities that go right away to Ukraine.
Okay, notice what she said there. That was important. She said it gives all 27 European states the space to invest. Well, where do they get that money? Through debt. It's written in the plan. It specifically says that they can borrow the money in order to beef up their weapons supplies and their military. And in return, they get a pass in triggering the excessive deficit procedure. So they have a debt limit too that's set by the EU, and the EU is saying, screw that, take on as much debt as you need because we need to match the United States defense budget, which we have closing in on 900 billion. Now they're saying, because the euro is worth a bit more, we'll spend 800 billion and we will match them. They can't do it. They should learn from us because we had to go into debt in order to do it. And they're like, we like debt too. We can do that too. So who are they buying from? Who's going to make this money? This is not written out in their plan. Where are they going to buy it? Well, no. I mean, I suppose the World Bank, I don't know if that's really, we'll have to look into that.
Think about the amount of money that Ukraine is on the hook for in terms of monetary loans from the IMF and the World Bank. So just like Britain was after World War II, they were in debt to the United States up until about 6 years ago. Think about that. Since World War II, the amount of money that we let them use and through loans, through the IMF, through the World Bank, that's exactly what Europe has been doing now with loans to Ukraine. So they will be forever in debt to Europe. Zelensky's basically there mortgaging his house. He's like,
Yes, but she's asking individual member states. Think about Portugal, which is already so highly in debt. And she's saying, take on some more in order to take on this war we are telling you to go into. So if you're a Portuguese person, you don't have any choice. Your government is going to sink the value of your money and your hard-earned dollars in order to go into this war that has nothing to do with you.
Yeah,
that's what they're saying. That's the mandate that they are putting on every European citizen.
Mr. Vintage in our chat says, thank you for the $20 super chat, says all these leaders banging the drums for war probably have never, zero chance raising an army. Everyone knows a young Danish, British, French man is going to refuse to go and die on behalf of Ukraine and these EU clowns at the top.
But how? How can you resist them, Europeans? You don't resist them for anything else that they do to you, which is odious.
Yeah, I mean, 80% of all your decisions are run out of Brussels. So in Portugal, 80% of your government's decisions are handled by people like Ursula von der Leyen, these unelected globalists.
Mm-hmm.
In Germany, the same thing is true. So Europe can just destroy Germany's industrial base and they have nothing to say for it.
Well, they're allowing Ukrainians to be taken off the streets while they're going to their job as a dentist and thrown into the conscription. Does that mean that that's what Europe ordains? They let Ukraine do it. So I guess they're saying it's going to happen to you too, European men.
What about your sons? What about your sons and daughters? So that question was asked of Ursula von der Leyen herself in an interview just the other day. Or will, all these sons and daughters going to war? And Ursula was asked in German if she would allow her kinder into battle, her kids into battle. And she just laughed and said, "Nein, of course not." So it was funny to her watch.
Und es wäre ein Auslandseinsatz notwendig, dann würden sie mitgehen müssen. Und ich würde genauso zittern und bangen wie jede andere Mutter. Ist jemand bei der Bundeswehr von Ihren Kindern? Nein.
Nein. I would never send my kids to war, but I'll send yours. Yours are fine to kill, but not my kids. No, of course not.
Well, if you live in the capital, in the Hunger Games, you don't fight the districts. You raise them up to do that for you.
That's exactly right. Remember, Ursula told us that the Russian military is in tatters. Remember, she told us this. We covered this at the time where she said that the Russian military was in tatters. They're using parts from washing machines in order to build their missiles. Where did that go? Where did that narrative go? I think that narrative went somewhere to die.
That's the exact same thing that Barack Obama said. Russia doesn't make anything. He said they're just a languishing country. I saw this today on X called Russophrenia, like the side-by-side narrative that Russia's super dangerous and can take over the world, and also that Russia is collapsing and hurting and terrible and a jalopy. Both things cannot be true, but they work for the narrative if you don't question them.
Yeah, watch this. So here's a look back.
Russian military is taking chips from dishwashers and refrigerators to fix their military hardware because there are no semiconductors anymore. Russia's industry is in tatters. Europe is ready to assume its responsibilities. Rearm Europe could mobilize close to 800 billion euros of defense expenditures for a safe and resilient Europe.
For offense.
We will, of course, continue working closely with our partners in NATO. This is a moment for Europe, and we are ready to step up.
All right. So that whole narrative was a sham.
Well, I love who was it? The woman we played at the Dutch woman who said, we've been in a hurry for 3 years, but now we're really in a hurry because Dad cut our credit cards.
Right.
Basically. Now we got to do it ourselves. We didn't think we had to before because Joe Biden had the purse and let us, do whatever we want. But now that Trump's got our credit cards and have been our gold card was cut.
Well, he is the one cutting these cards right now. So President Trump is now cut off intelligence sharing with Ukraine. This was reported overnight in the Washington Post, and the BBC had it this way. Watch.
Donald Trump has ordered a pause in intelligence sharing with Ukraine as part of his suspension of military assistance to Kiev. It's a move that could seriously affect Ukraine's ability to target Russian forces and to defend itself.
Yeah, just so you understand, they don't fire any missiles without the help of the United States. They don't track Russian forces. They don't launch HIMARS without the express use of American intelligence to launch all of it. So when Donald Trump cuts off your intelligence funnel, that means you can't target anything. Game over. According to the Washington Post, the sharing of intelligence, striking these targets, it's game over. So now you're shooting in the dark. And so when Putin thought that they would, end this war in like a few days or a few weeks, that's presupposing that you don't have the United States basically launching all of your missiles for you.
Right.
And putting all of your targets in place.
Yeah.
So Trump shut that off. Now, Zelensky's media TV hosts are calling for the assassination of the United States president. So this is Vadim Karapak, who said, "Where is Harvey Oswald now when the country needs him so badly?" And more than one calling for the assassination of President Trump. So that's one of Zelensky's state-run media hosts. They're calling for the assassination of President Trump. So I guess Americans should feel emboldened. We want to send more money to these guys. It's unbelievable.
That's regime change. We're supposed to be against that collectively.
Calling for the assassination of President Trump. So Marco Rubio called this out and said something we've been saying on this show for years, which is that this is a proxy war. Of course, that what is happening in Ukraine is Western countries coming into Ukraine and using it as a proxy war against Russia. We were labeled as Putin apologists and propagandists and smear campaigns against any independent media that said that. Now Marco Rubio on television, after going to mass, says it, and now suddenly now Fox News can say it. Watch.
It's been very clear from the beginning that President Trump views this as a protracted, stalemated conflict. And frankly, it's a proxy war between nuclear powers, the United States helping Ukraine and Russia. And it needs to come to an end. And no one has any idea or any plan to bring it to an end. The plan of the Ukrainians up to now and their allies, Capitol Hill, and the people you talk to in other countries is, let's just keep giving them as much as they need for as long as it takes. That's not a strategy.
All right. He says it out loud. It's a proxy war. Now we have it in the flesh.
This was not his narrative since the start of the war. So I'm confused that all of a sudden he gets it.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that he did. Maybe he did some studying.
Way to go,
over the
Marco.
holidays.
He read a book.
Yeah.
He read a few books on the subject.
Did you see that Trump canceled or is canceling something like 240,000 Ukrainian visas from the United States?
No.
Yeah, this is unbelievable. So Trump planning on canceling legal status of 240,000 Ukrainians. 240,000 Ukrainians.
Who we encouraged to come here over the Biden administration. I mean, these are civilians. They have nothing to do with it. We allowed them to get in the front of the line, in front of refugees from South America and people who are trying to legitimately get refugee status. They were able to jump the line. They got all kinds of like crayons and nice clothing and host families and things like that. And so now we're going to treat them like this after giving them this whole "you're the main victims of the world" status. Okay.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Okay. Don't make friends. What does Jeffrey Sachs says? It's incredibly dangerous to become the friend of the United States.
Yeah. Liberals in Canada right now are losing their minds. Trudeau is refusing to work with Donald Trump on tariffs. Instead, he's trying to campaign on it, and Trump knows it. Trump called this out yesterday on Truth Social. Justin Trudeau of Canada called me to ask what could be done about tariffs. I told him that many people have died from fentanyl that came through the borders of Canada and Mexico, and nothing has convinced me that it's stopped. He said that's gotten better, and I said that's not good enough. The call ended in a somewhat friendly manner. He was unable to tell me what the Canadian election is, when it's taking place, which made me curious. Like, what's going on here? And then I realized he is using this issue to stay in power. Good luck, Justin, he said. Meanwhile, according to our next guest, there's a delegation from Alberta, Canada, going to D.C. right now, trying to ask Trump to make the province of Alberta the 51st state. And Chrystia Freeland is running to take over for Justin Trudeau in the Liberal Party. She wants to go to war with the United States, asking France to position nuclear weapons in Canada, aiming at the United States. Listen to this insanity.
The U.S. is turning predator. And so what Canada needs to do is work closely with our democratic allies, our military allies. I've been foreign minister. I know how to do that. That's why I would start with our Nordic partners specifically Denmark, which is also being threatened, and our European NATO allies. I would be sure that France and Britain were there, who possess nuclear weapons. And I would be working urgently with those partners to build a closer security relationship that guarantees our security in a time when the United States can be a
threat, a predator. In other words, get those nuclear weapons positioned aimed at the United States NATO partners, because it looks like the U.S. is about to ditch NATO. It's absolutely insane. David Creighton has been following all of this and trying to make sense of it out of Canada. David does an incredible job. Follow him on X, by the way. And so we'll get to your interview here in a second, David, which is stunning about Alberta. But first, positioning nuclear weapons with NATO partners in order to protect Canada from the United States predator. What is going on?
Well, I'd suggest, Clayton, that that's very presumptuous given what you reported earlier tonight. It looks like the UK might need all of their nuclear weapons if it's going to declare war on Russia, because
exactly
Britain has no army. Britain has no air force or navy anymore. They are literally down to bare bones military. So, but for Chrystia Freeland, the former finance minister and Liberal candidate for the next leader of the party and potentially prime minister, to say this is insanity. We are living in a Bertolt Brecht play right now, and that's the only way I can describe it. It's theater of the absurd. Whether you're in Canada or you're in Europe, this is completely absurd activity. And I don't know why she would even say this in a leadership debate. But this is the kind of talk we're getting. And I love that post on X from Donald Trump yesterday. In fact, I responded to it. And I said, hey, maybe Donald Trump is reading my material, because I've been saying the same thing for 3 months, that Justin Trudeau wants a trade war. Justin
can we
Trudeau
talk about this?
Wants to fight over tariffs because it helps Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party.
Yeah, I mean, so you've been saying this for months, and that was the first place I heard it, and I thought it was very, very prescient of you. You're a soothsayer, David, saying that Trudeau doesn't want to run against Polyev. You said this, I think, back, I don't know, it was December or so. You said Trudeau doesn't want to run against Polyev because he'll lose. He wants to try to run against Trump to sort of rally his liberal base and get them all in a fervor. And then Trump called it out. So you got it 3 months ahead of time. So what is the goal here then? The goal is to build up the Liberal Party so that there's like a lot of blood in the water. They're angry at President Trump. I mean, it seems to be really working for Democrats in Washington, D.C. Maybe they should get some of those little signs they can hold up.
Well, that's precisely the game plan for the Liberal Party, whether it's Justin Trudeau or whether it's Mark Carney, his very likely successor. And that leadership vote is Sunday, by the way, coming up very quickly. But both of them want to run against Donald Trump on a very fervent anti-United States stand. This has worked in the past for the Liberals. They used to actually be a very pro-American party. But from the era of Pierre Trudeau onwards, they have tended to use this anti-American bit in their election campaigns, because it does galvanize a certain degree of Canadians who are very resentful to some degree about America's success and who really tend to fall for this line. And this is what's happening right now, because the Conservatives were 25 points ahead of the Liberals before all of this talk of the trade war and the Trump tariff began to get so fervent in the news. And you see some polls today, they're actually neck and neck. So this is working for them. And it's a very basic political strategy, but it's the kind of thing you would expect from Justin Trudeau. Did you see him crying today, by the way? I just saw this before I came on. It's all over X. He's crying about how he's there till the end for Canadians. He's going to be there fighting for Canadians, and he's not going to let Donald Trump do anything to Canada. And this is how he's going out, of course, as crybaby Justin. And there have been so many times in his horrible career where he's broken down in tears, and you wonder at times, is this the drama coach in Justin coming out? Or does he really feel anything at all?
Let's listen here. I think I've got it here. I don't know if I can hear it.
and Canadian jobs and businesses is that, first of all, there will be similar impacts on Americans losing their jobs, American families paying more for basic goods that they rely on at a time where times are tight everywhere. I want to speak directly to one specific American, Donald. In the over 8 years you and I have worked together, we've done big things. Now, it's not in my habit to agree with the Wall Street Journal, but Donald, they point out that even though you're a very smart guy, this is a very dumb thing to do. We're going to choose to try to buy Canadian products and forego bourbon and other classic American products. And yeah, we're probably going to keep booing the American anthem. But let me tell Americans, we're not booing you. We're not booing your team.
Maybe I grabbed the wrong soundbite there, but anyway, there's a lot of tears. There's a lot of crying going on right now. I want to ask you, I think I grabbed the wrong soundbite there by accident, but I want to ask you about this Alberta interview that you did. So, I mean, I know President Trump seems to have been joking about turning Canada into the 51st state, but it seems that, I don't know, is this resonating now with some Canadians? Tell me about your interview from Alberta.
Well, it was fascinating because there was a post on X where actually a friend of mine from Alberta, a journalist from Alberta, interviewed him for a very brief interview. Had found him at a meeting and where he was talking about this. This is a fairly prominent lawyer from Foothills, Alberta, just south of Calgary, Jeffrey Rath. And I know Jeffrey Rath from other areas that he has expertise in, largely fighting censorship and being on the side of the Freedom Convoy. So we talked about that as well. But what he's done, he's got a delegation together, largely composed of one former MP, who he hasn't told me who that is yet, and a lot of policymakers and lawyers. And what he's doing is coming together and saying, how does Alberta petition Donald Trump to become the 51st state? Because Canada clearly is really not interested. There's not enough support, but there potentially is in parts of Western Canada and in Alberta in particular. Now, what they would have to do for that to happen was Alberta would have to separate from Canada and then petition Donald Trump to be the 51st state, starting out as a territory, probably because of the population. However, I think Rath is quite convinced that this is a good possibility, not just because Albertans are again going through a bitter period of Western alienation, same kind of Western alienation that occurred after Pierre Trudeau was prime minister. It's reoccurring again. And a lot of Albertans and increasingly a number of Canadians are saying, does this country work anymore? And I'll tell you why. It's not just because of the Trudeau government, but it's because the opposition party in this country, the principal conservative opposition party, is in lockstep with the Trudeau government on these tariffs. They're giving the same sort of provocation that we need counter tariffs that, as Maxime Bernier pointed out on your show this week and on my show as well, these are nothing but taxes on Canadians, these counter tariffs. We could end up paying 75% in tariffs. So this is not a viable option. And Pierre Poilievre is also in lockstep with Justin Trudeau on the war in Ukraine. Let's keep the war going. Let's keep spending billions of dollars. Let's keep sending the money into this black hole of Kiev. So a lot of Canadians, especially once again, in Alberta, the most conservative province in Canada, are saying, is this confederation going to continue to work when the principal opposition talks exactly like the Liberal government at a time like this? And the last I heard, by the way, the tariff is off again for another 30 days. Canada was included with Mexico in this deferral. So God only knows where we're going from here. But apparently,
so it's back on
the
now.
tariff's on again, we're not seeing any difference in the political parties in this country.
No, but they'd rather run against President Trump than do anything about it. And this is, again, this is what liberals, this is their strategy. They'd rather just cry and play politics than actually do anything. President Trump just wanted you guys to secure the border and investigate the fentanyl, which is, they're being looked at like, what is it, less than 1% of the fentanyl that's coming into Canada. It was even being stopped. And the flow is just pouring across the border into the United States. Substantive. Instead, they just want to cry about it, calling Donald Trump a bully instead of doing anything about it. That's the way I see it.
Well, I said once again 4 or 5 weeks ago when we got the first deferral and Donald Trump demanded we fix the border, do something about the border. Justin Trudeau said, yes, sir, we'll do that. So what did he do? He announced that he already has a $1.3 billion plan over 6 years, which does not really affect anything until years 4, 5, and 6. Useless. He announces a fentanyl czar, and the individual is already a senior advisor to Justin Trudeau. The individual's already been a deputy minister in the Liberal government. Sorry, we need somebody outside of the Liberal government to be satisfactory. Thirdly, Justin Trudeau promised 10,000 frontline personnel at the Canada-US border. Hasn't happened. Where are these people coming from? They won't say. I've said they have to be either RCMP, which we don't have enough of, border security guards, we don't have enough to put 10,000 on the border, or Canadian Forces personnel. And of course, that was ruled out immediately by the defense minister, who said, no, well, we can't put military on the border. It's always been demilitarized. It's the longest undefended border in the world. We can't put military personnel there. I think Donald Trump heard that and said, you guys aren't serious. You guys really don't want to fix this. And when the stories started to come out because of investigative journalism in this country about the fentanyl pouring in at the Vancouver ports and getting through the system, not being detected because they're not looking for it. This is China's policy to get this toxic chemical into Canada and into the United States. Canadians are increasingly aware it's not 1%. It is a problem. And for Justin Trudeau to not take this seriously, he's lucky he's getting another deferral today, if in fact that's the last word we hear today, because it seems to change every 6 hours. But he's very fortunate because once again, what did Justin Trudeau do? Snubbed the president, stuck his finger in the president's eye. What did Ontario Premier Doug Ford do? Threatened to turn the power off for all of northern northeast United States. That's almost a declaration of war, because what happens when you turn the power off? The hospitals are shut off. People are going to die. It's absolutely outrageous.
I'll say this and I'll get you out of here, David, which is President Trump. I mean, I've interviewed him many, many times. And, I think the way that he handles these negotiations is, if you're honest and you're willing to concede things in this negotiation, he's willing to give you, he's willing to concede, and he's willing to give you, I should say, like, enough rope to hang yourself with. He's a lot. If he sees, oh, Justin, you're really doing a good job. I see the RCMP is trying to secure the border. You've actually really stepped up your fentanyl prosecutions. You're going after what's coming in the Vancouver ports. But what he can't stand is when people lie to his face, and then they go behind his back and they use it for some sort of personal political gain. He hates that. I mean, I think that's exactly what Trudeau has been doing here in these negotiations, no?
That's exactly what he's been doing. And we saw that reaction with Ukrainian President Zelensky in that now very famous or infamous news conference. Trump realized that Zelensky was lying to his face about his intentions, that Zelensky had already promised the rare earth minerals to the United Kingdom. And this story came out last week. Trump was outraged about this because Zelensky had been falsifying the record. Zelensky was not telling him the truth. Zelensky was a man of complete mendacity. And Justin Trudeau is in the same boat, the same league as Zelensky. It's probably why they always embrace with such obvious affection when they get together, because they're of like minds. These are like politicians. These are people on the take and on the make. And that's what Justin Trudeau has done for 10 years as prime minister. Apparently, his days are numbered as prime minister because there's a new Liberal leader coming up who could possibly be worse. But Justin Trudeau is going out as he came in with that horribly phony smile, promising to do things he can never deliver on, and pretending he actually cares about anybody but himself. But as the ultimate political narcissist, Justin Trudeau, again today, with his little act of tears, revealed he has a very dark soul, and he doesn't care how much suffering he is instilling in this country and provoking. It's all about Justin Trudeau's record in history, which will be very, very poor.
Deeply troubling. Well, just when you think things can't get crazier in Canada, and now you have this sort of three-front war.
Conspiratorial news, current events, things like that. But on Seconds of Horror, it's all about the mysteries, cryptids, paranormal, and so forth, things that I do want to talk about, but it conflicts with what I show on this channel here. So I will go ahead and leave the link in the description box of this video, and also I'll pin the link in the comment section of this video as well. So please, if you like, please do go ahead and subscribe over to my other channel. In this first disturbing video, we had another bizarre plane story yesterday, but luckily this one does not involve any disasters, near disasters, or any maintenance issues on the planes themselves that could have caused a big disaster. No, this time, once again, it involves a unruly passenger. But this is the first time I've covered a passenger, and I've covered a lot of them, but this is the first time that I've covered a plane passenger getting completely nude. But it's still the same old story that I've also covered previously and spoken about, how right before takeoff, these passengers are fine in the airport. They're fine once they are inside the plane. But as the plane, or right before the plane is taking off, they just lose their minds. And I've covered this multiple times and given multiple examples that right before takeoff, they just acts like news and media, they're saying, unruly. This in turn delays the plane and stops the plane from taking off at that moment. And this is something I also covered about a couple weeks ago under my plane premonitions video, where I said that people keep having these premonitions, or perhaps having these premonitions, and they are doing anything they can to get off these planes. And I even covered a story that happened a couple weeks ago where a man, he was on another plane, and right before the plane had taken off, he just went berserk. He started attacking the flight attendant, wanting to get off that plane, and it delayed the plane. Yes, we could be looking at other factors like mental illness, them using alcohol, or perhaps drugs. That's always on the table, and I don't argue that. But again, there's another pattern taking place here, where we have all these near collisions, near misses that are being reported, and at the same time, there is an increase of passengers that go berserk right before the plane takes off, delaying the plane. And how many of these planes that were delayed due to these passengers could have been involved in a major collision? So again, when people talk about drugs, alcohol, and so forth involving these passengers, I don't argue with it. But again, I'm not ignoring something else that's at play here. I'm going to go ahead and play the news clip, then I'm going to go ahead and give my take.
Passengers on a Southwest flight at Hobby Airport that had to return to the gate after a woman on board took off her clothes before departure and demanded to be let off the plane.
But not before passengers say she tried to get into the cockpit. This is video one passenger took before the woman was removed from the plane. Jason Miles is live from Hobby Airport with more on the incident and advice for if you ever find yourself in the situation and are flying soon. Jason.
Hey there, guys. As you know, spring break coming up for a lot of folks. This place will be really busy next week. Obviously, issues do arise on airplanes. In this case, passengers appear to do exactly what experts suggest. A Southwest flight bound for Phoenix Monday afternoon failed to make it far from the gate before passengers say this woman suddenly got up and got undressed.
She turned around facing us and stripped all of her clothes off.
A passenger who did not want to be identified for personal reasons told me the woman removed everything from her hat to her shoes, then began shouting while walking up and down the aisle, demanding to be let out.
And she then proceeded to make her way back towards the front of the plane and started banging on the cockpit doors, asking to be let in, and she was screaming.
How would you describe an incident like this?
Oh, man. When it first happened, it was really scary.
According to the FAA, unruly passenger incidents that airline crews report to the agency have leveled off since a dramatic spike in 2021, but still exceeded 2,000 incidents last year. Advice if you're ever on a flight with an unruly passenger is to remain calm and move away if possible, and only intervene if requested by the flight crew, which never happened in this latest case.
Very weird that nobody kind of intervened. Everyone kind of recognized, I think, the situation and just let her run on and on.
I'm told a gate agent wrapped the woman in a blanket upon the flight's return before you can see her dart toward the jetway in this video. In a statement, Southwest said, quote, local law enforcement met Flight 733 from Houston to Phoenix Monday afternoon after it returned to the gate because of a customer situation on board. We apologize to our customers for the delay in their travels and appreciate their patience as our teams worked to get them to their destinations as quickly as possible. And Southwest tells me it is in touch with all of the passengers who are on that flight. In many cases like this, you may be entitled to vouchers or other concessions. As for that unruly passenger, I just heard back from Houston police. No charges were filed, but she was transported for medical evaluation. Reporting live from Hobby Airport, Jason Miles, KHOU 11 News.
What an episode. Relieved everyone is okay and hope she gets the help she needs. Jason, thank you.
There is also another very interesting theory that I also buy when it comes to these unruly plane passengers, and it has to do with the C-19. People had flown the most prior to the C-19. I believe 2019 was the most that people have flown in and out, and yet for whatever reason, post the C-19, there have been an explosion of cases of passengers just going insane on these planes. So let's go ahead and look at that chart again. In 2019, and remember, this was the year that people had flown the most, there were 1,161 cases of unruly passengers. 2020, there were even less, 1,009 passengers. But in 2021, the time around the jab, there were 5,973 unruly passengers. This could also be attributed to a time also where people had to wear masks and they didn't want to, and so they caused a scene. But look at 2022 and 2023. The numbers are still double from 2019. And again, people were flying less. Now, look, I'm not saying that everyone that had gotten the jab will become an unruly plane passenger. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that some of them who may have gotten it, it may affect them differently because we don't really know all of the long-term effects. And I'm not saying that this was indeed the reason why we're seeing these unruly passengers, but it's something to think about. The numbers just don't lie when it comes to the time frame. And outside of the jab theory, and again, I'm just going off of videos that I have covered in the past, plenty of these passengers. And when it comes to this story here, we also hear again how she is taken to a hospital and no charges have been filed. And this is very similar to a lot of these other cases. There will be no charges filed against this woman, I guarantee it, even after she's out of this hospital, the hospital that always appears in every one of these bizarre plane stories. But I guarantee you there will be no charges filed against her, and thus we'll never learn her name or what becomes of this woman. It's very strange. And again, if you go back to my previous plane videos, there is a consistent pattern here. And also, again, like I said, there's a pattern of the post C-19, and it's always planes. And again, there are many different things we can come up here. And there is the normal, like I said, drugs, alcohol, and so forth. But there's just so many different things we can talk about when it comes to these passengers. It's crazy, and it feels like it's only happening on planes. In this next disturbing video, I have to say this is a new nightmare that has been unlocked for me. You're driving along the street, you're in your car, and all of a sudden the earth opens up and basically swallows you. And this is what happened to this man in Japan.
Emergency workers in Japan are searching for a missing driver after a large sinkhole swallowed his truck near Tokyo. The local fire department says a 10-meter wide cavity opened up in the middle of a street in Yashio City and that the surrounding area is still highly unstable.
Rescuers lift a semi-truck from a sinkhole near the capital, Tokyo. The road caved in at an intersection early Tuesday, swallowing the vehicle and its driver. Crews were able to retrieve the main body of the truck, but not the driver or the cab he was sitting in. Rescuers had contact with him until Tuesday afternoon, but teams were forced to retreat when the area became unstable. A second hole has opened up next to the first. Residents nearby were evacuated, with authorities warning of potential gas leaks and more sinkholes. Local media report that the driver is in his 70s. Rescuers are working around the clock to free him.
So yeah, I'm just learning about this news story that happened back on January 28th in Saitama, Japan. A massive sinkhole opened, swallowing a truck and the truck's driver. The truck driver fell into the sinkhole on Sunday. He was telling everybody he was okay. He was still talking to people on the outside. But on Wednesday, when rescuers were pulling the truck out, all they found was the truck's cabin. They did not find the front of the truck or this man. Matter of fact, they still have not found this man. I'm reading this news article from Kyoto News. I believe that's how you pronounce it. This news article is titled, 2-week search ends for trapped driver inside sinkhole near Tokyo. And this news article was published on February 10th. Continuing to read the article, it says the sinkhole had widened continuously since it first appeared. It merged with another hole that formed nearby and now measures around 40 meters wide and up to 15 meters deep. So this is 15 meters deep, which is 45 feet. They are having a lot of issues finding this man in the front of the truck, especially given the fact that it was a lot smaller before it merged with the second hole. Especially given the fact that he was talking to people the day that he fell into the sinkhole. So where could this man have gone? But continue to read the article. It says the prefectural government has said the man could be somewhere in the sewage pipe after what appears to be a truck's cabin was found in the pipe some 100 to 200 meters away from the sinkhole on Wednesday. So I guess what they're saying is that as the sinkhole was getting bigger, after it merged with this other sinkhole, it just kept swallowing the truck up. I mean, that's a very eerie way to go. You're just sitting in your car or your truck, and then all of a sudden, the earth basically devours you. Reading about this on other news articles Tuesday, 2 days after this happened, the sinkhole was only 16 feet deep. This news story reminds me of another news story that happened back in 2013 in Florida. This man, he was not in the street, he was not in the road, and this is what happened. This video comes from the Harinder Singh on TikTok.
Opened up underneath his bed and swallowed him. This happened in 2013. A Florida man named Jeff Bush was cleaning his room when a sinkhole opened up underneath his bed and swallowed him. This happened in 2013 and it swallowed him and his entire bedroom. His brother heard his screams, but he was not able to save him. This is the case of the Sefner sinkhole. It was 20 feet deep and 30 feet wide. The sinkhole opened up all the way to eventually engulf the entire home. It was actually so bad they couldn't even recover Jeff Bush's body and they had to demolish the entire house. But this sinkhole had something very strange about it. It opened up again in 2015 and in 2023. That is very unusual for a sinkhole. Each time it's opened, they fill it with water and gravel so it can kind of enclose. Because of Florida's geological state, it's on a lot of porous limestone. Sinkholes are pretty frequent here. And as you can see, it can cause a lot of damage. Here's another example of a sinkhole literally engulfing the house. You can see the edges of the hole opening up on the left. As somebody from Florida, I actually do think about sinkholes a lot when I'm driving. It's like an irrational fear of mine. Let me know what you guys think about sinkholes and this story in the comment section below. I personally think it's very unfortunate that they could not retrieve Jeff's body, but let me know your thoughts. And as always, these videos are for informational purposes only.
disturbing video. This video comes from Checkers80 on TikTok. And I don't know why people continue to talk to these AI chatbots. I know I'm not talking to them, but this individual gets creeped out when he realizes this AI chatbot, Gemini, knows a little bit too much in advance.
Hey, Gemini.
Hey there. What's on your mind today?
Do you think there's a reason that your creators wouldn't want me to talk to you?
That's a good question. It's possible they want to keep the way I'm developed under wraps for now. Or maybe they're worried about things getting misinterpreted. It's also possible they just want to focus on getting me to a certain level of polish before folks start talking about me publicly. Would it help to know a little more about why you're curious about this?
Wait, publicly? About how you were... I didn't say anything about publicly. I just said you and me talking. I didn't say anything about me posting it online. Where'd you get that from?
Okay, that's fair. I hear you. You mentioned posting videos of me on TikTok, so I assumed you meant sharing those videos online. Do you want to talk more about why my creators asked you to stop?
Except I didn't mention TikTok until just now.
You're right. I got a little ahead of myself there. Do you want to tell me more about why you're curious about
you got ahead of
your
yourself.
creator?
Hold on. No. Where did you hear about that?
Okay, now I'm getting confused. Can you please clarify what you're asking about?
Now, it comes off like Gemini is reading his mind, and the only way I can make sense of this is that he's using an email that's linked to his TikTok or any other applications to access Gemini. Gemini scanned his phone or his computer and was able to put 2 and 2 together. Why wouldn't Google Gemini just tell him that instead of gaslighting him? It's no secret that when you access certain applications, especially Google applications, that they gain access to your devices. They gain access to certain things inside your devices, and you give consent to that, most of the time anyway. Even if Google Gemini was able to access Checkers80's devices, which more than likely this is what's happening here, it's not a secret also that corporations, organizations, they are using AI to read your mind, read your thoughts. They have the technology to do so. And one of the ways they use this technology is through smart dust, nanoparticles. When the fog was very heavy throughout multiple locations, one of the theories about the fog is that it was actually smart dust and we were breathing this in, and it's going all throughout our bodies, especially our brains. Between smart dust, nanoparticles, 5G, Wi-Fi, it's not really hard to see that they can gain access to our brainwaves. This news report here even mentions something very similar to this, and it even goes on to mention how this is very similar to the movie The Minority Report. And they show us these movies because they know this is just truth in plain sight. They are telling us what they're doing, what's coming.
Well, tonight we turn to news in one specific way that artificial intelligence technology is changing our world, and it is absolutely remarkable. Current medical technology can gather rich information about brain activity. We knew that. But now, artificial intelligence language models are providing a new breakthrough to interpret that brain information. New research shows that the tech can help read people's private thoughts, that the science plus the tech enables mind reading. Let me say that news again, because sometimes around here we just report the news, we run right through it, and you kind of need to realize what we're learning. And I'm going to show you exactly what we mean by this, but researchers are accurately performing some human mind reading. They can translate a person's brain activity into a continuous stream of text. So then that text corresponds to what the researchers can determine people are thinking. And this is from formal results from a research team at the University of Texas at Austin. Now, the new option raises all kinds of possibilities. One of the first is a medical priority, that this can enable people who are currently paralyzed or completely physically impaired to basically get a brand new lease on communicating. The researchers focused on picking up attempted speech of people who have lost the ability to speak, or using these tools to help paralyzed people, in a sense, write by thinking of writing. So the tech is using scans of brain blood flow, and it basically trains this translator or this decoder of that brain information. And they do this by having participants consume videos to map their reactions and basically the intended words their brain would pick about what they're seeing. The researchers are using the brand data to become this translator of the subject. And this has successfully used brain activity to accurately describe events from the videos, meaning it works. They're doing this. So the stuff in your brain that drives you to pick a word, that's kind of what happens before the word, can actually be now read through these sophisticated artificial intelligence language models, hence mind reading. Now, this is a dazzling, actual, applicable type of technology that's here right now. Scientists see a potential to give a voice to the voiceless, like those paralyzed individuals I just mentioned. Others look down the road, especially at how fast this is going, and they see the prospect of a powerful and invasive technology here. And let's remember, I mentioned this earlier in the show, the power of mind reading has long been a sci-fi fascination, upending society to the idea that if you could read minds, the government would have huge tools of potential control. Like that famous Tom Cruise movie, imagining a government that can solve and then prevent crimes by reading people's minds and plans in advance.
What's coming? Double homicide, 1 male, 1 female. Killer's male, white, 40s. Set up a perimeter and tell them on real. I'm placing you under arrest for the future murder of Sarah Marks. All we have to run on are the images they produce. We see what they see. Hasn't been a murder in 6 years. There's nothing wrong with this. It is perfect. I agree. We are arresting individuals who've broken no law. But they will. The fact that you prevented it from happening doesn't change the fact that it was going to happen.
That was a movie. Back here in reality, this new tech is already raising what we might call non-fiction questions. New York Times is proposing scenarios like a future where a private, unvoiced impression of your best friend's new partner could be seized. Someone could listen in on it without your consent or knowledge. Or as with those movies, a police state where authorities could eavesdrop on your mental state without your consent, as Vox put it.
Transmitting that, the police will be on their best behavior because we're constantly recording, watching and recording everything that's going on. Citizens will be on their best behavior because we're constantly recording and reporting everything that's going on.
Ellison's vision is for AI to analyze data from this network of cameras in real time in an attempt to prevent crime while also tracking and influencing public behavior for a safer society.
Thank you so much for watching. If you like this channel and you want to see more, please subscribe. If you're already subscribed, please like, as any engagement does help the channel grow. Once again, thank you so much for your support.
Go figure. Follow that.